Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Genoveva Arellano. I am a member of the outreach team for the California High-Speed Rail Authority, and it's my pleasure to welcome you tonight to a presentation update on the Burbank to Los Angeles project section for the statewide system of the California High-Speed Rail program. As many of you know, the high-speed rail program has been in the planning process for some time. You'll receive a presentation tonight to give you an update on where the program is statewide and where we are locally in terms of the planning process bringing high-speed service here to Southern California. For your information, tonight's meeting is being presented in a fully bilingual format. All of our information here on our information stations are in both English and Spanish, as all our materials, and we will be repeating tonight's presentation at 7 o'clock fully in Spanish for those in attendance and our online viewers. As I mentioned earlier, tonight's meeting is being webcast, so welcome to all of you online. Thank you for participating. If I can see a show of hands of those of you here tonight who, for you, this is the first time that you've attended a high-speed rail meeting. So about 8 folks or so. Welcome. We really try to get the word out about this very important program here in Southern California. So please spread the word and continue participating with us on the planning process. You'll receive information tonight about where we've been, where we are today, and where we're going this coming year of 2017, which is pretty important in terms of the project decision and as it's moving forward. I would like to say that tonight's meeting is purely informational, so there aren't any decisions to be announced or comments that you formally need to submit. There will be a very formal comment period in 2017 where we will ask for formal public comments on the environmental document. But until that point, our goal tonight is to give you the latest information about the project, so that there aren't any surprises when the very technical, detailed information about the specific project alternatives are presented to you, and then you can comment more formally at that point. So our goal here tonight is to give you the latest information here via the presentation and through the staff in the room and all the materials that are available to you here tonight. Would like to mention as well that all of the materials are available online, so you can view it again at your leisure later today or anytime, and encourage others to do so as well. Tonight's meeting format, we will be doing a brief presentation followed by a Q&A, a question and answer period. We would be taking your questions either online or those of you who have presented them to us here in the room, and our panel will sit and address each question by one. We are here until 7:30 this evening, and we'll be able to continue answering your questions on a one-on-one basis tonight. We also do have foreign language services tonight. In addition to Spanish, we also have Chinese and Vietnamese interpretation available. So we've checked with all the attendees here tonight to make sure that those services are offered if they are needed. We do have a set of speakers who will be walking you through the presentation tonight. Starting our presentation will be our Regional Director of the Southern California Office of the California High-Speed Rail Authority, Michelle Boehm. With that, I would like to introduce Michelle to you and have her start our presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Genoveva, and I wanted to reach out and thank everybody who came to tonight's meeting. Your participation in this process as we work on coming up with the best design for this project is really, really valuable to us and important. And so we recognize that you've taken time out of your day to come help us with this, so we really, really appreciate that. As Genoveva mentioned, we are going to be running through a brief overview of the high-speed rail project and then some specifics about this project section, Burbank to Los Angeles. We will have Melissa De La Pena, the project manager for this section, and Jaime Guzman, the environmental manager, speak after I speak about some of the specific things that you should be looking forward to as we move through the process of defining the project that we would build here. Here is the agenda that we're talking about tonight. As I mentioned, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the overall California High-Speed Rail program, then give an overview of the objectives that we want to achieve for the Burbank to Los Angeles program. At that point, I'll turn it over for some specific information on the Burbank to Los Angeles section. So on this slide, you will see a map of our planned 800-mile all-electric high-speed rail project. You can see the navy blue from San Francisco down to Anaheim. That is our phase 1 project. That's the project that the Burbank to Los Angeles section is on. It's towards the southern end of it. We have 2 phase 2 extensions, one in the north to Sacramento and one in the south through the Inland Empire and down to San Diego. If you take a look at this map, you will also see, I think you can see even from the back, but it might be a little small, you can see some white dots on both the navy blue section and the yellow section. Those are the locations that we've chosen as our station candidate locations. And one thing that is really, really interesting about our project is where we have identified that we would put these stations. We have identified that we would put stations in the heart of 8 of the 10 largest cities by population in the state of California. So this project is really about mobility for the state of California, and it's about the connection to the central business districts up and down the state of California that we don't have right now today, that this service would offer frequent, reliable, regular service between those central business districts and really connect them in a way that they are not connected today. So that's one of the key considerations that we're looking at from the state perspective when we're looking at a project like this. We're also looking at the fact that we really need to plan for success. Today in California, we have 39 million people living here, and the state recently released, the Department of Finance does a report on the population. They recently released it. When I started giving presentations on the Burbank to Los Angeles section, we had 38 million people living here. So today we have 39.2 million people living here, and that's going to continue to grow through this century. By the middle of this century, we predict that we will have 50 million people living in the state of California. So we need to start planning now for the mobility for those 50 million people in the future, because we know that mobility is something, particularly here in the Southern California area, that's quite a challenge. It can be quite a challenge to go short distances, and it can be a very big challenge to go longer distances. Just for your frame of reference, on a system like this, if you were to have the high-speed rail operating in the future from Palmdale to Burbank, that trip on a high-speed train would take you about less than 20 minutes. Today, if you drive, particularly during traffic, that trip is going to take you an hour and a half, possibly even 2 hours. So that's the kind of mobility that we're looking at when we're looking at the high-speed rail service. We're also looking at, because it's electric, it's not going to be emitting any greenhouse gases into the environment. And the state of California has identified climate change as a key issue that we want to address through this century. We also want to make sure that we are fostering a strong economic climate for the future. And I talked about those connections between the central business districts that will be so critical that this project will bring to the fore. But while this project is being built, there are also a lot of jobs associated with it, and then there would be a lot of jobs associated with it when it was operational, because we would need people to take care of the trains, to run the trains, to take care of the stations and all of the associated equipment with this project. So those are the reasons why high-speed rail has been selected to complement our existing transportation system. And I think that's key too. This is meant to complement what we have now. It's not replacing anything. It just makes sure it comes into existence. We start running these trains. They complement our existing trains. We have stations in areas that are easy to get to on other forms of transportation so that you have smooth and easy connections across the state. And this is something that I do not know a lot of people recognize. We are building the high-speed rail project right now. We have almost 120 miles of the high-speed rail project under construction in the Central Valley. The Fresno area is ground zero. That is where we've started our construction, and the construction is then extending south through the Central Valley towards the Kern County limit. You can see on the slide pictures where we started with the construction was building the bridge structures that we need. And so you can see pictures of that construction going on. This is why it is so critical that we do our job down here and define the route that we will build the high-speed rail alignment along, because we're building it right now. So we want to do a very, very good job identifying how we're going to build it down here in Southern California so that when we get here, we have a whole set of good decisions that have been made and we can continue the construction. And this is the slide that just kind of encapsulates what we're doing here from Burbank to Los Angeles. It is a 12-mile section of the high-speed rail project. We are treating it as a separate project for the environmental clearance purpose, with a station in the north at Burbank and a station in the south at Los Angeles Union Station. This marks the transition of the high-speed rail project in Southern California from a project that is coming in at a full-speed high-speed rail into the Burbank area, and then from Burbank south to Anaheim, we are entering the existing rail corridor and would be bringing high-speed train service alongside our existing Metrolink, Amtrak, and freight services operating in our existing rail corridors. When we are looking at this and planning at this, there's a lot of coordination that we need to do in order to make this work. And so we are talking with the other rail providers about this, and we've put forth a series of ideas basically for this corridor. Number one, we can put additional tracks in a lot of this corridor within the existing right-of-way. We can then electrify these tracks and run high-speed rail in this corridor. We can build these tracks in such a way that other services could operate their trains on these electrified tracks as well, so that we could have more frequent Metrolink service, more frequent Amtrak service if we chose in the future. We want to seal this corridor up and make it safer, make it a better neighbor. So we're going to put up better fencing, more consistent fencing around the perimeter of the entire corridor, not just around the area where high-speed trains would run, but around the entire corridor. We're going to automate that fencing so that we know if people are trying to climb into the corridor, so that we can alert the trains to that and have them slow down so that they're not running into anything. We are also going to grade separate to seal this corridor. So anywhere that we have roads going across the corridor at grade right now, we're going to lift the road up or put the road under, or lift the train up or put the train under the road. So the roads and the trains, the cars and the trains are not crossing at the same level. This then means that the corridor is quiet zone eligible. So as this corridor operates, the trains no longer have to blow the horns as they come to these at-grade crossings. The arms don't come down with the clanging at these at-grade crossings. And so this corridor is now a better neighbor. It's a quieter corridor and it's a safer corridor. And while we do that, we can put in the capacity in this corridor to operate high-speed trains as one of the service offerings. There would still be Metrolink service in this corridor. There would still be Amtrak service in this corridor. We would just get the benefit of all of these services in the corridor. So that is the general approach that we're taking in this corridor south of Burbank. And when we do this, we look at and have to balance a series of competing needs and concerns to come up with the best possible design. And we have roughly shown this process here with these circles. So we're looking at the project in 3 major categories, and then we balance those 3 major categories in order to come up with the best design. And you can see down in the corner the project objective category. That's a lot of the engineering considerations. That's the need for this project to be designed so that it's safe. We need to design it so the trains can operate at the appropriate speeds, whatever they are, if they're 200 plus miles or if they're in an urban corridor like this and they're less than that, we need to make sure that they can do that. We need to coordinate with other services using the corridor to make sure we can come up with a plan where everybody can meet their needs. We need to put stations where we can get the most people riding the train so that we get the most public benefit. Those are the types of things that fall into that project objectives area. Then over on the other side, you can see the environmental resources. That's the water, the plants, the animals, the air, all of those things that resource agencies work with us to make sure that we're protecting. And so there are a lot of concerns and considerations that we evaluate within that area as well. And finally, and not by accident, we have the community circle, right? This is what we're doing tonight. We're learning more about your community so that we can do a better job designing this project so that it can integrate into your community. So this is where we learn, where are those restaurants that everybody goes to? What are those important roads that you detour on as locals, that the rest of the masses traveling through LA don't know about, so that we know about? And we can look at when we're planning construction detour routes and things of that nature. And so those are very important issues for us as well. And what we want to do is bring those together to a best possible design that balances those 3 main areas. And so here's basically a list. How do we do this? How do we set this in motion with the technical analysis we're doing, with the consultation with resource agencies, with the information we gain from the community? How do we set this in motion? Well, part of it is we go out and we talk to the community, and you can see a whole list of previous meetings, discussions that we've had with differing members of the community to help us understand that. At the same time, we're doing a lot of analysis, technical analysis, engineering analysis on what we're doing to test and retest our assumptions and how we're designing the project. And then we're also consulting with the resource agencies at the same time. And this is what happens when we do this. When we strike this balance, when we put this into play, as we go through time, we are able to get a better and better design for the project. And so you can see what the project looked like in 2010 and the evolution through time to today in 2016. We were originally looking at this as part of a broader project. We were originally studying Burbank to LA just as a piece of a Palmdale to LA project. And with all of the complexities going on in this area, we felt that this was very important for us to study as a single standalone project so that we could deal with the coordination issues with the LA River, for instance, which is in this area, and with the operation with the other service providers. And so over time, we were able to identify this as its own separate environmental document and handle it that way. It's also very important to note that the decisions in this section do not drive the decisions in the sections to the north or the south. The decisions that are come to for Burbank to Los Angeles, particularly with regards to the station configuration, don't in any way influence what we would ultimately end up selecting for the Palmdale to Burbank project section. So that's something that's very important to note here as well. And so here at a high level is a summary of the principles that we're employing as we're looking at these urban corridor running projects. You can see up there at the north, there is a purple section that is on a curve, and there is a green straight section. We have been looking at two potential locations for our platforms for our train to stop in the vicinity of the Burbank Airport. One of those locations basically brings that stop over very close to where the airport is proposing to relocate their terminal. We've been looking at this for a couple of years, and they needed to go through the election process to have that terminal replacement project approved. That happened this past November. They did have that approved, and so they are now moving forward to build that airport replacement terminal there on the east side of the airport. Therefore, we are now strongly favoring that underground approach that would put our train platforms and station right adjacent to that airport terminal facility. And just a note about our maps, where you see purple on the maps, that's where our proposed alignment is below grade or underground in a tunnel. And where it's green, that's where it would be on the surface. Any blue area is where we would be on a bridge. And so again, we just want to stress that this is a mixed use corridor. There would be multiple services operating in this corridor. It is owned by LA Metro right now, and it hosts the Metrolink, Amtrak, and freight service. It would continue to do that in the future. We would weave in high-speed rail service into that mix and increase the capacity there for more train service. And with that, I'll bring up Melissa to talk a little bit more specifically about some of those features of sealing the corridor and creating this high mobility urban corridor concept.
Good evening. So as mentioned, we're going to walk through the corridor in a little more detail, zooming in city by city, what the project looks like as we move down the corridor. Starting in Burbank, we were just talking about the two platform options, and you can see in a little more detail the purple option that swings slightly to the south, and the at grade, which is a straight, more of a straight alignment to the north. This alternative maintains the downtown Burbank Metrolink station in its location. We pass that station at grade and move south into the Glendale area. There are two grade separations associated with the at grade alignment that are currently being worked on by Caltrans. And the two exhibits here kind of demonstrate what the underground section could look like at the station area for option B. Moving southerly into Glendale and Atwater Village, you'll note that the alignment through here is all green, all at grade, and the little circles along the alignment are all of the at-grade crossings and grade separations that are proposed as part of our project to implement, which we'll get into a little more detail later. The station here is the Glendale Metrolink station. Again, we're preserving that historic station in place with tracks running on the westerly side of that alignment. And in this part of the corridor, we're essentially proposing two electrified tracks, two non-electrified tracks running within the existing right-of-way. Where we bulb out from that is in the areas of those grade separations. Further south from Glendale into Los Angeles toward our terminus at Union Station, we stay at grade along the existing corridor. The one at-grade crossing that remains here is Main Street, which we will be separating. We are coordinating with the Metro team for Link Union Station, which is essentially the run-through tracks, to come into Union Station with all the other providers that are running along this corridor with us. So they will be bringing high-speed rail into the Link Union Station project. Just to talk about other project features associated with the alignment statewide, it's not just the tracks and the trains. There's also the overhead catenary system, which are the wires that run above the trains, so that will be part of the project. There are paralleling stations, switching stations at various intervals throughout the corridor. This is a short section, so we don't have as much of that equipment in here, but it is part of the proposed project, along with the early earthquake warning system and intrusion protection that was mentioned previously. Focusing in on the features of the grade separations in a little more detail, you'll note that the majority of those are in the Glendale area. There's Sonora, Grandview, Flower, and Chevy Chase are the existing grade crossings. And then on the south is Main Street. So we are proposing to grade separate all of these. It is going to be a completely grade separated corridor from Burbank to LA. Something to note is that we are not just separating the high-speed rail. We're separating all of the operators that run on the tracks there currently, so it will be completely separated. The one in the middle there with the highlight is actually the Doran grade separation project, where there's currently proposed a grade separation at Salem Sperry to take the place of Doran and Broadway Brazil. And also at Chevy Chase, there's an option to do the grade sep at Goodwin. So I mentioned that this is where we're focusing on the impacts, because this is where the impacts leave the corridor more than in the straightaways. So in exchange for that, we get these safety benefits of having the rail fully separated from the road. We have reduced noise. As mentioned, it's compatible with a quiet corridor through this section. There's reduction in greenhouse gases, since the cars don't have to sit idling waiting for the train. We also have improved train operations through the corridor as a result of implementing these. So, and that is kind of a sample of one of the grade separations. And we're proposing to take the roads under, but we are looking at what the impacts are and letting that drive the ultimate decision on these. This is just a summary list of all the grade separations for this corridor from Burbank to LA. So again, there's Sonora, Grandview, Flower Street, Chevy Chase, Goodwin. And in the city of LA is Main Street. That's one where we're crossing both rail and actually the river as well, with an overcrossing. The grade separations that are underway in the corridor by other agencies are the two I mentioned by Caltrans, which are Buena Vista and Empire, and then the Doran grade sep, which is Salem Sperry. So now I'm going to have Jaime Guzman come up and talk a little bit about the environmental process.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming out here. My name is Jaime Guzman. I'm the environmental manager for high-speed rail for this section. And what I want to talk to you about is give you a brief overview of the environmental process, where we have been, where we are now, and where we hope to take the environmental documentation in the next year. For those of you that have followed us for a while, and even for the people whose first time this is, we've been primarily in the planning process, completing some alternative analyses and some preliminary environmental and engineering. Now we are going into a more robust environmental process where we're completing technical reports, and we are also doing some further refinements in engineering. We also are then now looking at potential impacts and then going back to the engineering to make sure to see if there's possible ways to avoid some of those impacts. Our process usually starts there, where we want to make sure that wherever we are, we're trying to avoid as much impact as possible. We're trying to get to that medium where we're taking into consideration the needs of the project, the needs of the natural resources and the needs of the community. So we start with avoiding impacts if we can altogether. If there's no way to really avoid the impact, we look at ways that we can minimize it by reducing the footprint, by reducing what kind of aspect of construction we need there. And finally, the last step is if we can't avoid or minimize it, we start looking at potential mitigation measure. And that's something that we will be evaluating fully in the technical reports and in the environmental document that will come out next year. The environmental document will include many, many topics. A lot of this is a joint document with California law and federal law. So we have very different kinds of topics that we'll be doing technical reports for, such as aesthetics. We're looking at environmental justice and also traffic, noise, air quality. All of those topics will be have their own technical reports and be available for public review in next year. In order to go into that more robust analysis, we need to compare what the future condition will be to existing conditions. So we've gone out and done some field work in the public right-of-way. That includes recording the existing noise levels that are out there to be able to compare that to what it will be with the train, with the high-speed rail in it. We look at traffic, so we can compare what the construction traffic will be like. We also look at taking photographs, so then we can do simulations of what the train will look like coming through that area. You probably have seen some of those on the presentation that was here prior to this presentation, and in some of the other stations we've shown what the simulations would be like. Those are preliminary, but we wanted to share them so that you can guys get an idea of what it will look like coming through the corridor, and that will be refined further in the document. As for a timeline, right now we're, again, coming out here to get more input, to present where we've gone from the last step, which was the alternative analysis. And what we're hoping to do is that by summer of next year, we will have an environmental document to review. And then at the end of next year, we could have a final document. Before the draft document, there will be opportunities to come out to the public and for people to present their ideas to us as well. As was mentioned, for areas where we know we are going to impact outside the right-of-way, which are the grade separations, we'll be having more detailed meetings with the community focused on that. And there is actually a station over the engineering station where you can sign up if you want to be emailed for those specific meetings if you live in that area. In addition to that, after the draft, we will be having a formal review period and a formal public hearing where your questions will be taken, and then all of that will be incorporated into the final document. So this is our last meeting from the set of meetings that we started last week. So we had a good turnout for the meetings, and we appreciate your time here. But as I said, I want to remind you that we are open 24/7. There's our online. You can always reach us by email, online. And we are going to be letting everybody know who signed in when there would be new meeting rounds that you could be part of. And with that, I will turn it over back to Genoveva. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jaime, and thanks to all of you. It's a lot of information. High-speed rail is a technology and a transportation system that's been around a long time, but has not occurred here in the United States and is new to California. As California has done many times over, it leads the way for the rest of the nation in new innovations, and this is already happening, as Michelle mentioned. But to do this type of transformational major public infrastructure that is definitely needed today and into the future, we have to do our planning and outreach and communication with folks locally. So we really appreciate your participation here. We've had lots of meetings like this in the past, and we will continue to do that as we lead up to the draft environmental document. As Jaime mentioned, that will be the time next summer where a formal comment period will occur. That will be a time where we very much encourage your in-person presentation of your questions, online submittal of questions, or by email. Those are all welcome. Today, we welcome comments constantly. We are open 24/7. These are recorded, and it informs the team as they move into the draft environmental document what people are thinking about specific to this section. The analysis is already occurring, the documentation will be done, and you will remain informed of the project as it moves forward. I would like to ask if anyone in the room or online has any questions or a question card that you would like to submit. Our staff can collect those now. And that if I can ask Michelle and the team to come forward so we can address these one by one. And then for those of you interested, please stay. The staff is here through 7:30 tonight to answer your questions at the information stations or anything else that you would like to tell us on a one-on-one basis. Okay, make sure I got this right. This first question is, the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach project about 40,000 53-foot containers per day will be transferred between the ports and the high desert corridor, so the goods movement of the ports into the region. Will surface routes Burbank to Union Station conflict with the need for the northbound and southbound unit trains on the BNSF and UPRR right-of-way? So the same right-of-way that this section will be using, the potential conflict between the freight corridor, the freight traffic, and the high-speed rail service. What alternatives are under consideration other than freight and trucks?
So I can't speak specifically to all of the considerations that the port are considering when they're looking at what they're doing. But what I can say is we are very cognizant of the fact that these corridors are used for goods movement. Goods movement is a very complicated issue in Southern California, but it is a critical issue for our local economy. It's very important. And so when we're looking at bringing high-speed rail into these existing rail corridors, we are factoring in the fact that there will be freight trains running in these corridors, and we believe there is ample capacity for us to bring our service and for them to continue to be used to move freight as well.
Our next question, so where are the parallel stations in Atwater Village?
We're still refining the locations of all the paralleling communication towers, so those will need to be placed and studied as part of the environmental document. So we will have assumptions for those locations in that document.
Okay, one moment, please. The next question is, will you present Goodwin and Chevy Chase before the EIR? Does that mean the plan for Goodwin and Chevy Chase? Will you present the plan for Goodwin and Chevy Chase before the release of the environmental document?
We have concepts for both. Present them as part of a public meeting, I guess is the question. Yeah, so when we have those one-on-one grade separation meetings with the communities, we will focus on the concepts at each of the locations.
So I would like to emphasize for further interest in the grade separations, as Jaime mentioned, there will be follow-up meetings where we will be reaching out to those neighborhoods specifically. We really encourage folks to participate in those. The plans and the concerns about impacts in those areas is what the staff really wants to engage with folks more specifically. While there are folks here we know from those areas, we really want to move those meetings into that neighborhood and have, I think, a fuller discussion about that. So make sure that we notice if you're interested in that on our sign-in sheet here, but we will be using our existing database to target the noticing for those areas. The next question pertains to mitigation measures. What type of mitigation measures are being considered for noise and vibration impacts along residential corridors?
So one of the things that we will consider is, obviously, as I mentioned, we look at the existing noise and the future noise with the project. What we will see is if there's a need to mitigate it such that it above a certain threshold, some of the potential mitigation is to reduce or put some dampeners for vibration. That is work that is being implemented in some train systems now, minimizes it. There's also potential for noise walls. Those are usually what you see typically as a mitigation for noise. Noise walls don't just come in one type. We can have different materials that they're made of, and we would be looking for the community input on those once that actually gets implemented. At the environmental document point, we will be looking particularly more at the need for the walls or for some kind of protection. But in terms of what actually gets built, that's going to be another public process, because obviously the people who live there are going to be affected by it. And people would have the opportunity to give their input on what they believe should be the type of noise barrier as well. So those are some of the things that we'll be looking at for noise.
This is, the noise and vibration question is actually a very popular one along the entire system. Folks are very concerned about, or folks are familiar with what the noise they hear today with existing rail service. As an electric train, the noise emanating from the system is different than it would be for a freight train. However, there's still noise that gets added to the corridor. So the team is very focused on analyzing and what we know about high-speed rail trains and the noise that they emit and how they interact with those environments. And as Jaime mentioned, that gets coupled with the existing conditions, and that gets very in a detailed way presented in the draft environmental document. So this is, I think, one of our most commonly asked questions and concerns from the community. Just to follow up on the Chevy Chase and Goodwin area, I think folks need to know more specifically about how those two interact. So let me follow up with this question here. How will the grade separations be mutually implemented for Chevy Chase and Goodwin? So maybe Melissa, can you talk more about what the plan is and how Chevy Chase and Goodwin it's either?
The way that they're related is that Goodwin is just north, and it would, if selected as the grade separation, Chevy Chase would be closed. So it would be a replacement grade crossing. It wouldn't be both streets grade separated. It would be one or the other.
And at this point, we don't know which one would be one.
We're
the
still
analysis still
exploring
needs
both
to
and
be
coordinating
completed.
with the cities. Yeah.
Right. And for that reason, especially, I think the follow-up meeting that we would have in that community area would benefit the team in understanding, how both would operate and what people are currently experiencing and what we could imagine would be the case if either grade separation is implemented.
Right.
We definitely have Melissa and the engineering team here to further talk about the grade separations. I would really encourage more discussion about that here tonight, and then as we mentioned, we will follow on with those additional meetings. Jaime, an additional question regarding noise. Trains 10 times per hour with 19 hours per day. The concern is 190 trains per day is the estimate. At least this is what this individual is writing. Will there be horns at grade near Glendale train station 190 times a day? So I think the point of the question is the concern about noise and the horns. So can you further explain what the policy or the program entails as it relates to horns and high-speed rail?
Sure, and we understand that the current condition requires trains to blow their horns at at-grade crossings. What we're hoping to do with the design is that we're trying to close it so that we don't have to do any horn blowing. We don't have any signals, the arms coming down. That's why we're going to be trying to do all the grade separations. If we were still having to do the at-grade crossings, then those horns and whistles would have to continue. But the point of the grade separating, because most of the streets in that corridor are already grade separated. So it's only actually a few. There's a bit more grade separation proposed from Los Angeles to Anaheim because there's less intersections that are already grade separated. So we're just basically closing the rest of the corridor, and we would avoid that. And as Melissa and Michelle mentioned, that also allows for the possibility for the quiet zones in this area, which would be a great benefit to the communities around there.
As Michelle mentioned earlier, we know that there are impacts surrounding grade separations, the construction of them. But the idea is to completely separate the system from street traffic. It's an immediate safety benefit to the community and a congestion relief for the area. Many cities have implemented these now with other transportation projects, and the flow of traffic is much better, and the horns from existing Metrolink or other services go away immediately when they don't have to announce that they are crossing in an area because they are completely separate from street traffic. So this is a major benefit of the grade separation program from the high-speed rail program and other agencies. But it needs to be planned, it needs to be communicated and well-designed, integrated into a community. We'll continue talking about this, but this is something that is a highlight of concern and of interest in the Burbank to Los Angeles section. I have another couple of questions. For rail sections that will be underground, will there be the possibility for bikeways and other pedestrian or other uses at grade? So the mix between other modes of movement around the grade separations that are underground.
Currently, there's not a plan to put bike lanes in the tunnel section up by Burbank Station. I think that it's more of a station issue. We'll make sure that it's multimodal and that it can accommodate bike traffic as a mode of transportation to get to the station. And certainly up and down the corridor, we understand that there are bike lanes that are aligned throughout the alignment of the train, and if there is an impact with a grade separation or some other improvement, we'll make sure that it's replaced in kind as it exists today.
Can you emphasize, though, will there be the possibility for bikeways or other uses at grade? So if we're underground, is there a way to continue to make that continuity for bikeways or other uses?
If there's a bikeway that we will be severing with the construction, we will connect it over the tunnel section, yes. If we're underground, possibilities are as they exist today at grade.
At grade.
Yeah.
So then, for example, if we had a grade separation and the rail was going over, the street is going underneath, pedestrians and bikeway and
Yes.
bikers could also go underneath, and that connection would still be maintained.
Yes, connection for bike will be maintained, as well as pedestrians.
Perfect. If you have further questions on this, this is really an exciting element of the program of encouraging the multimodal aspects in the community and making sure that we make those connections. An additional question is about the timeline. When will the Burbank to Los Angeles phase be implemented? So more about we know about the environmental document. What about the next steps of when it would be implemented, constructed, and operated?
So the California High-Speed Rail Authority releases a business plan every 2 years on even years that talks about the accomplishments that we've made in the last couple of years and the plan to construct and operate the train. We released that in the beginning of this year in 2016, and in that plan, basically we are describing that we would have the entire system from San Francisco to Anaheim operational in 2029. So it does take quite a long time to bring a project of this magnitude to fruition. The plan is to first operate trains from the Central Valley to San Jose, or the Silicon Valley, valley to valley, in 2025, and then continue to work south and north to have those trains operating over the entire section in 2029. So we do have a good amount of time to have a good discussion on what we are building here for the Burbank to Los Angeles section. We do, though, have plans that we could start some projects early in partnership with other agencies. We've identified some funding from the High Speed Rail Authority that could begin some of the grade separation projects and some of the improvements at LA Union Station as soon as we get the environmental clearance, because it will be important to start getting some of these projects built as we go forward, so that we could then utilize them for construction detours and some other things like that. And also so that the existing services like Metrolink and Amtrak can take advantage of having the corridor, for instance, grade separated at additional locations, additional improvements at LA Union Station, including the run-through tracks, which would operationally very much help Metrolink and Amtrak. So that's what we're looking at.
Thank you, Michelle. A couple more questions regarding the grade steps and how the tracks would be laid down. So what are the factors being discussed with the City of Los Angeles in deciding to close Goodwin or Chevy Chase? So again, that question of how are we going to decide that? The engineers are, of course, aware of the high water table in this area. So there's a question on how will that decision be made, and specifically with the city staff.
So the Chevy Chase at-grade crossing is actually in Glendale, but we have been coordinating with the City of LA as well, because the westerly join of the project actually right at the border of the City of LA. So we're getting input from both cities on what's proposed there. Currently, we're looking at a bridge over, so we won't be going under as more typical in the Glendale grade steps to the north. And it's a mix of, discussions with the city on future access needs. If where we're joining with the at-grade street at Goodwin, is there other plans there? This is the same discussion we're having with Glendale. What are the surrounding properties? Are there plans for that area to do something different? So it's a matter of keeping up with what's in the works as we move forward with our design to, as best we can, implement that.
A separate question relating to the tracks for the section between SR2 down to Union Station, and we obviously are in a shared corridor in this case. Will the Metrolink and the UP railroad tracks be moved to the eastern side of the right-of-way? So can you talk about the position of the respective tracks?
Yes, for the whole alignment, the electrified tracks are running along the west edge of the right-of-way, the existing right-of-way, and the non-electrified tracks will be on the easterly edge of the right-of-way, and that's basically all the way from Burbank into Union Station. So, as Michelle mentioned, there's opportunities to share between operators, and that's something that we're still looking at. But as far as where the electrified tracks are, they're on the west side. And there are places where there are existing tracks in the middle of the right-of-way. They will be moved over to accommodate the additional 2 tracks in the corridor.
As we're talking about the electrified tracks, we have a next question dealing with the electromagnetic fields near the tracks. So what are the known effects or dangers or concerns of the electromagnetic fields near train tracks? That is a section of the environmental document.
Yes, so we do have the EMI, EMF report that we're working on currently. Obviously, it's a higher voltage than your typical light rail, so we need to look at the effects of that. I'm not an EMI, EMF expert, unfortunately, so I can't speak to that, but we can offer a response to the comment from our expert as needed. But it is a topic that's being evaluated right now. We've taken some existing readings in the corridor so that we can compare it to what is proposed with the with the train. But we do have a lot of sensitive uses from hospitals or veterinary offices and other uses in the area that we need to consider when we're putting this train there. So it will be evaluated. But I apologize, I'm not an EMI MFF expert. I can't answer the question
But
exactly.
let's follow up for the individual who asked this question, and we can follow up with you more directly and get you existing information on what we know from other systems, including the documents of the high-speed rail system in the Central Valley. I think that would be a good resource to point you to.
Yeah, that's right.
We have a question from an online viewer. What speeds would the train run if there are residential areas in close proximity? So I know you talked a little bit about north of Burbank, between Burbank and Los Angeles. What would be the estimated run times or speeds?
Yeah, so once we enter the urban corridor here south of Burbank, the top speed for that corridor, or the top speed that we are designing that corridor to be capable of, is 125 miles per hour. And the top speed that we're designing the corridor south of LA Union Station for is 110 miles per hour. That means that when we're looking at the elevations of the track and we're looking at the curvature of the track, we're building it at a very high quality. It does not mean that the trains will operate at that speed, but the straighter and flatter the tracks, the safer the operation of the train. So if we use a little bit of a higher standard there, we get a better result for all the operators.
We have our final two questions, and then I think we're going to need to move on. We're going to need to do our Spanish presentation at 7 o'clock. So if there are any other questions not already submitted, please follow up with staff directly following our presentation next. Very quickly, follow up on the alignment of our high-speed rail tracks and the Metrolink or Amtrak tracks. The question is whether they will be realigned of the Metrolink tracks, or will they stay where they are? So can you talk about the the tracks as they currently exist? How will they move in order to accommodate high-speed rail?
So the section varies from Burbank into Union Station. The majority of the alignment, as I mentioned, has the tracks in the middle. And we can fit 4 tracks within the existing right-of-way, but it would require shifting the Metrolink tracks, or the tracks that exist today, easterly, and then implementing 2 additional tracks on the west end of that. So, and then as we move forward, or southerly from there, there are some areas where the Metrolink tracks would stay where they are today, and we would implement electrified tracks along the west edge of the right-of-way, West Bank.
So it varies along the alignment, and this would be detailed in the document,
Yes.
exactly what's existing and what would be proposed to change.
Right, and where we will be moving the tracks and where we propose to keep them where
Final
they are.
question regarding some old alternatives where we had tunnel alignments going into Union Stations. Why were the Tunnel 1 and Tunnel 2 options rejected? Was there any economic reason, or why are those not being considered?
The reason that the more we looked at the corridor, we realized that at these slower speeds, we were able to kind of keep our alignment within the existing corridor. And this brought to fruition opportunities for improving the other existing corridor features. We're able to grade separate, for example, as I mentioned, the corridor. We're able to bring other safety and operational enhancements to the existing corridor that we wouldn't have the opportunity to do if we peeled off into a tunnel on our own into Union Station.
Okay.
It's easier to construct, yeah, that's another factor. But in essence, it was in order to multiply the benefits. We also have the LA River that mirrors the alignment of the rail for a portion of it, so we're looking for opportunities to collaborate with the river, with the cities, and other projects that are along the alignment.
And then in discussion with some of the communities, there was quite a lot of concern because when you have an underground alignment, it doesn't just mysteriously disappear underground. It has to enter into the underground feature, by slowly going below grade and then going through a portal. And the areas that had been located for some of those portals, there would be quite a lot of impacts associated with that as well. So when we employed, if you will, the balance of the technical, the environmental, and the community concerns, it came to the fore that it was a better option to look at designing this at grade and multiply the benefits of this investment so that Metrolink and Amtrak and freight services all benefit. The local communities benefit because there's more safety in this corridor and it's a quieter corridor than have the impacts of, the tunnel portals within the communities getting into the downtown area.
As you can see, there's been a lot of input and movement, refinement of the program as we moved along. We thank you very much for your questions tonight. They help the team tremendously understand the concerns, and we will do that follow-up. Please continue to follow us online, through our social media, through our website, and we will continue informing you of our next steps. Continue to participate. Thank you again.